My name is Naomi Tran. I am 31 years old, and from as far back as I can remember, I have always been the serious one, the quiet one, the one who got things done. I am the firstborn in a Vietnamese American family, and growing up in Tacoma, Washington, our household was always loud, but not because of me. It was my younger brother Julian who made all the noise. He played guitar loudly in the living room, held impromptu jam sessions in the garage, and kept the house vibrating with his wild dreams and spontaneous energy. My parents, especially my mom, adored him for it. I, on the other hand, preferred silence. While Julian blasted punk rock or freestyled on his keyboard, I curled up in the hallway with a library book. At age 10, I was learning to write code off an old computer magazine I found at the thrift store. When other girls my age were learning to dance or going to sleepovers, I was teaching myself basic HTML and reading everything I could about building websites. Birthdays made the difference between us so painfully clear. Julian would unwrap stacks of gifts, limited edition guitars, designer sneakers, or concert tickets. And I usually got a card with some money tucked inside, which I quietly stashed into a shoebox labeled for Stanford. "What are you saving for this time, Naomi?" My dad would ask with a chuckle, shaking his head like it was a quirky habit. "A laptop," I'd say. "The school ones are too slow." "That's nice," Mom would murmur, already walking toward the kitchen to check if Julian needed more snacks while he played. Even when I brought home straight A's, they clapped politely and moved on. Julian once got a C+ in music theory, and my dad practically framed the paper, claiming he was finally focusing on his gift. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I knew they did. But I was like the steady foundation holding up a house, unnoticed unless it cracked. Julian, meanwhile, was the colorful wallpaper, the flashy lights, everything they wanted the world to see. In high school, I tutored other students after class to earn extra money. Julian, meanwhile, spent weekends rehearsing with his band and getting free passes to music festivals. I applied to 10 universities, worked relentlessly on my essays, and when I got a full scholarship to the University of Washington, I ran into the living room holding the acceptance letter with both hands. "Mom, Dad!" I got in with a full ride. Mom glanced up from helping Julian pick out an outfit for an open mic night. "That's wonderful, Naomi," she said absently, smoothing down his collar. "Julian, try the other jacket. This one hides your arms too much." Dad looked up from his phone. "Well done," he said. "We knew you day to get in." I remember standing there for a long moment, holding that letter, wondering why my heart felt so heavy. That night, I went back to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the printed words that should have made me feel proud. It was one of the biggest moments of my life, and somehow, it had already passed without echo. I thought maybe, just maybe, once I was out of that house and in college, things would change. I would prove myself. I would be seen. I had no idea just how wrong I would be. College was a revelation. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued ideas over appearance, persistence over charm. In a computer science class during my sophomore year, I met Elena, sharp, driven, with a mind like a steel trap. We teamed up for a class project, and what began as a school assignment turned into long nights of brainstorming, debugging, and ambitious dreams. One evening over instant noodles and cold coffee in the library basement, Elena leaned over and said, "We could build this for real, Naomi. Not just a class demo, something people could actually use." I blinked at her, surprised, but deep down I had been thinking the same thing. That night, we stayed until dawn, sketching out what would become our first prototype, a productivity platform for remote teams. We called it WorkNest. We poured ourselves into it, coding all night, pitching to professors during the day, entering every startup competition we could find. We lost most of them. But one panel of judges, 2 retired engineers and a venture capitalist, saw the spark. They gave us our first grant, $15,000. It wasn't much, but to us, it felt like a golden ticket. I didn't tell my family about it. At home, Julian was still bouncing between dreams, music, then photography, modeling for a bit. When that faded, he decided to become a producer. Our parents applauded each pivot. "He's just exploring," Mom said proudly, as if it were a virtue. Meanwhile, Elena and I worked through weekends and winter breaks, developing WorkNest into a functioning beta. I took extra gigs tutoring freshman coding students just to afford data storage and better servers. We started getting traction. A few dozen users, then a few hundred. Tech blogs began to notice. A recruiter reached out from a mid-sized firm in Seattle with an offer, but I turned it down. I wasn't building this to work for someone else. I was building it to create something that was mine. Then one day, it happened. A mid-tier SaaS company reached out. They wanted to license our technology. The amount they offered was more than I had ever seen in my life. Elena and I stared at the email in stunned silence before she screamed and pulled me into a hug. We were 24. We had just crossed the threshold from struggling dreamers to legitimate founders. I remember walking around the city that night with tears streaming down my face, not from sadness, but relief. I had built something from nothing. I had done it. The next morning, I called home. My heart was pounding as I waited for Mom to pick up. "Mom," I said, barely able to contain my excitement. "We just got our first major deal. A real company is licensing our platform." There was a pause. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she replied. "Anyway, Julian just released his new EP on Spotify. He's thinking of doing a release party. Isn't that exciting?" I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I just nodded, even though she couldn't see me. It didn't matter what I achieved. In their eyes, Julian's every move was golden, and I was just Naomi. But something in me shifted that day. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply understood that my wins were not for them. They were for me. And I was just getting started. A year after the licensing deal, Elena and I officially incorporated our company and moved into a small office in downtown Seattle. It had no windows and smelled faintly of printer toner and instant noodles, but it was ours. We bootstrapped everything, paid ourselves just enough to survive, and poured every cent of profit back into development. By the time I turned 26, WorkNest was profitable. Not just surviving, thriving. That summer, my parents called and said they wanted to renovate the family home. The roof needed fixing, the kitchen was dated, and Julianne, who had moved back in, wanted a creative space. They asked if I could help. I wired the money without hesitation, $35,000. No questions asked. I did it because I thought it might finally mean something. That maybe, just maybe, they'd see me not just as the dependable daughter, but as someone worthy of acknowledgement. Months passed. The house looked beautiful when I visited. Julian had converted the garage into a sleek music studio, complete with foam paneling and neon lights. My parents gave me a quick tour, pointing out the new granite countertops and the soundproof doors. "You've really made this possible," I said softly, watching Julian record himself through the glass. "Oh, Julian's friends helped with the design," Dad said quickly, brushing off my comment. "He's got such vision, doesn't he?" I stayed quiet. Later that evening, something strange happened. I was in the study looking for an old photo album when I came across a folder on the desk. Inside were property papers, deeds, names. I paused. The home was now listed under Julian Tran. I checked again, certain it must be a mistake. But no, the ownership had been quietly transferred. My name wasn't anywhere. That night at dinner, I brought it up. Lightly, cautiously. "Hey, I saw the title transfer paperwork. You guys put the house in Julian's name?" Mom gave a sheepish smile. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just easier this way. You live in the city now. Julian's here. He'll take care of us as we get older." "But I helped pay for the renovation," I said, trying not to let my voice shake. Dad set down his chopsticks. "Naomi, you're successful. You'll have your own houses. Julian needs the foundation. You understand, right?" I nodded slowly. No, I didn't understand. But I saw clearly, maybe for the first time, that in their eyes I was never going to be the priority. No matter how much I gave, no matter what I built. I drove back to Seattle that night in silence. I parked outside my apartment, turned off the engine, and sat there with my hands on the wheel. I thought about the hours I'd spent writing code in that cold library basement, about the ramen-fueled all-nighters, about the $35,000 I'd sent without a second thought. They saw me as a resource, a wallet, a backup plan, but not as a daughter. And that realization, as painful as it was, set something inside me free. They would never see me, so I would stop trying to make them look. 2 years later, I bought my first home. Not an extravagant penthouse, not a mansion perched on a hill, just a quiet, sunlit townhouse tucked in a leafy corner of Capitol Hill with clean hardwood floors, a small balcony, and just enough space for me to feel like I could finally breathe. It wasn't about showing off. It was about having something that was truly mine, a space untouched by judgment or comparison. I decided to host a birthday dinner. It wasn't really my style. I usually kept things quiet. But this time, I wanted to mark the moment. I invited a few close friends from work, my co-founder Elena, and yes, my parents and Julian. I thought maybe, just maybe, celebrating in my own space, surrounded by people who valued me, they might finally see what I had built. The day of the party, I spent hours preparing. I picked out a warm color scheme, laid out a beautiful dinner spread. Nothing over the top, just thoughtful details. My friends arrived first, bringing homemade dishes, laughter, and genuine excitement. They toasted to me, to my journey, to the grit it took to get here. Then the doorbell rang. My family arrived late, as always. Julian strolled in like he was walking onto a stage, sunglasses still on despite the cloudy evening. My parents followed, both dressed like they were attending a gala. Not a cozy dinner. My mother barely looked around before whispering, "So small. Are you sure this is the living room?" I forced a smile. "It's enough for me." Julian plopped down on the couch and said, "Yo, Nay, this your furniture? Or did the company give it to you as a perk?" "They're mine," I said simply. Dinner began, and for a while things were bearable. Elena talked about our newest project launch, and David, my colleague from marketing, complimented the lighting setup I had wired myself. That's when my mother leaned in and said loudly to the table, "Did Naomi tell you Julian's planning to move to Los Angeles? He's been invited to a private artist development program. Industry professionals, real stars." The room fell quiet. I looked at her, then at Julian, who was grinning like a prince being crowned. "No, I didn't know," I said evenly. "That's great. He'll need some help, of course," Dad added casually. "Rent there is outrageous, and the program doesn't cover housing. But this is his dream." I felt it coming like a slow wave. My mother smiled sweetly. "Naomi, dear, you're in a good position. Maybe you could help your brother get started, just until he finds his footing." I looked around the table. My friends sat frozen, unsure if they should speak. I set my fork down. "Actually, no, I won't." The silence grew dense. "I've already helped," I continued, my voice soft but steady. "I renovated your house. I sent money. I supported his dreams without being asked. But I'm not going to fund another experiment." Julian laughed, a short, cold sound. "Wow, you always act like a martyr." My mom's face tightened. "Naomi, this is your brother. Don't be cruel." Cruel? That word hung in the air like smoke. I stood up. "You know what's cruel? Expecting someone to give and never be seen, never be heard, never be enough unless they're sacrificing something." No one said a word. I walked to the kitchen to clear my plate, heart pounding. Behind me, I heard whispers. Mom calling me ungrateful. Julian muttering something about me always being bitter. When they finally left, the air in the house felt cleaner. Elena stayed behind to help me clean. She didn't say much, just handed me a glass of wine and said quietly, "You don't need them to be proud of you. You already did the hard part. You survived without their approval." I nodded, not trusting my voice, because for the first time I realized she was right. A few weeks passed after that dinner, and things grew quiet between me and my family. There were no follow-up calls, no check-ins, not even a passive-aggressive text from Mom. I welcomed the silence. I threw myself into work, buried in late-night debugging sessions and team meetings. The next product release was coming up, and I had no room for distraction. But one Friday evening, I came home from the office and noticed something strange. My mailbox had a letter from the bank. I hadn't used that branch in years. The envelope was thick and marked "Regarding shared security deposit box access." I opened it slowly, my pulse beginning to rise. Inside was a statement. It listed an inventory of documents that had been removed last month. Copies of my original startup agreement with Elena, a hard copy of the WorkNest prototype schematic, and a notarized version of the IP ownership clause I had written and sealed myself 6 years ago. These weren't just old papers. They were proof of authorship, legal backing for everything I had built, and they were gone. I sat down, heart racing, and read the next page. Authorized access granted to Julian Tran. The room spun. I immediately called the bank, demanding clarification. After a long hold, the manager confirmed that Julian had used a duplicate key, one my parents must have kept, to enter the box. He claimed he was handling family estate matters. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the floor, running every possible scenario through my mind. Why would he take those documents? What was he planning? It wasn't long before I found out. On Monday morning, I received a LinkedIn alert. Julian Tran had been tagged in a new post. It was a photo from a business event in Los Angeles. A new startup had just launched, and Julian was introduced as strategic advisor and original systems contributor. I clicked the link to their website. There it was. A stripped-down version of WorkNest's backend engine. Our code, our structure, our logic. Only they had slapped a different UI on it and called it Stage Sync. My hands shook as I scrolled. Julian was in a suit, smiling confidently in every photo, surrounded by executives and investors. In one interview clip, he said, "I've always been fascinated by project flow and developer tools. The system came from years of planning and research. It's deeply personal." I nearly screamed. He had stolen my work, my vision, my foundation, and my parents had helped him do it. I called them. The line rang 5 times before Mom answered. "Oh, Naomi," she said brightly. "How are you? Have you seen Julian's new venture? We're so proud." I forced my voice to stay even. "You gave him access to my deposit box." A pause. Then, "Well, dear, technically it belonged to the family. You always say everything you do is for us, don't you?" I could feel the blood drain from my face. "Those were legal documents, Mom. He's using my code. He's lying to investors." She sighed. "You always make things so difficult. Julian finally has something to build on. You have so much already. Why can't you share just a little?" My throat tightened. "Because it's mine." Dad's voice suddenly cut in. "Naomi, don't call again if you're going to act like this. Your brother is doing what you never could. Bringing the family into the spotlight. Be supportive." I hung up. Then I screamed. The sound that came out of me was something I'd never heard before. Rage, betrayal, grief. I sat on the floor of my hallway, surrounded by legal pads, old prototypes, and decades of effort, and realized what I had to do. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to take it all back. The day after that phone call, I walked into the office and handed Elena a folder. She flipped it open, skimmed the documents, then looked up sharply. "Are you telling me Julian used your original IP filings and pitched it as his own system?" I nodded once, jaw clenched. "Stage Sync is basically WorkNest version 1. He repackaged our skeleton code, removed our name, and slapped his face on it." Her expression hardened. "We're going after him, right?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I said, "Before we do anything legal, I want to set a trap." For the next few weeks, I operated on 2 fronts. By day, I handled investor meetings, coached my dev team, and continued to run the company like nothing had happened. By night, I became a shadow, gathering evidence, screenshotting code structures, tracing server logs, and quietly reaching out to our first angel investor, who now ran a tech publication. I also hired an IP lawyer who specialized in startup theft. Elena and I built a case, strong, undeniable, with a paper trail that led straight from my safety deposit box to Julian's startup pitch. Then I did something bold. I sent Julian a message. "Hey, heard you're pitching to a few venture firms. Good luck out there. I'll be watching." He replied with a thumbs up emoji. Smug, careless, just like I hoped. 1 week later, Julian and his team announced they would be holding a private investor event at a boutique venue in Los Angeles, by invitation only. I RSVP'd. not as myself. I used Elena's assistant's name. The night of the event, I flew in quietly, wearing a simple navy blue suit and no jewelry. I entered the venue with my lawyer and our investor contact, both posing as my guests. The place was modern and full of buzz. Waiters passed out champagne. A banner above the stage read, "Stage Sync, reinventing remote collaboration." Julian stood at the front, beaming under the lights. When he took the mic, he started with a lie. This platform was born from years of trial and error. I wanted to solve problems I personally faced as a developer. I stepped forward from the crowd. "Interesting," I said calmly, "because I don't recall you writing a single line of code in your life." His face went pale. The crowd turned toward me. "I'm Naomi Tran," I said clearly. "Co-founder of WorkNest, the platform this one was copied from." Gasps. Phones came out. People started recording. I handed the MC a small drive. "Play the video," I said. What followed was a side-by-side demonstration of our early product and Stage Sync's platform. Same architecture, same features, even some of the same UI logic. My voice narrated it all in a quiet, steady tone. Julian tried to interrupt, tried to explain, but the damage was done. Within hours, tweets and articles were circulating. Startup star exposed as fraud. Julian Tran accused of stealing sister's tech. Family feud unfolds in Silicon scandal. Investors pulled out. The startup imploded. Julian's partners ghosted him within days. And my parents, they called in a panic. "Naomi, how could you humiliate him like this?" I said nothing. I just hung up. Because for once, the silence felt like peace. The days that followed were a whirlwind. But not for me. I didn't have to do anything. The truth had already become wildfire. Tech news sites published exposés. Podcasts dissected the family betrayal, and legal experts weighed in on intellectual property theft. One commentator even called it one of the most personal takedowns the startup world has seen. Julian tried to go online to defend himself, but the damage was irreversible. Every tweet he posted was met with screenshots of our original contracts, side-by-side code comparisons, and recordings of his lies at the investor event. I watched it all unfold quietly from my apartment, sipping tea, but not everyone took it well. My parents showed up at my office unannounced. The receptionist buzzed in, her voice nervous. "There's an older couple here. They said they're your family." I considered telling her to send them away, but something inside me whispered, "Let them see who you really are now." I stepped into the lobby. Mom was in full performance mode. Red eyes, trembling hands, voice pitched high. "Naomi, please. Your brother's life is ruined. People are calling the house. We can't even show our faces at Temple." Dad stood beside her, arms folded but face pale. I said nothing. "Was it worth it?" Mom asked. "Embarrassing your own family in front of the entire world?" I tilted my head. "You sold me out for applause he never earned. You helped him steal from me. And now you're upset that people know?" Mom's eyes welled with tears. "You have everything. Why did you have to take this too?" I stepped closer, my voice lower now. "Because it was mine. And because you taught me long ago that if I didn't protect myself, no one else would." Dad tried to interject, but I turned to the receptionist and said clearly, "Please escort them out. They're not welcome here." The look on their faces wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. Not because I was cruel, but because I had finally stopped being quiet. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept a photo of me and Julian from when we were kids, sitting under a blanket fort, a flashlight between us, reading a comic book. I stared at it for a long time before folding it gently and placing it in the trash. Some things, no matter how sweet the memory, don't belong in your future. In the weeks that followed, Julian disappeared from public view. His friends abandoned him. The investors threatened lawsuits, and the house he was renting in LA was listed for sale. My lawyer finalized the settlement. Julian issued a public apology and paid damages using what little he had left. It wasn't about the money, it was about principle and peace. With the case closed, I packed a single bag, turned off my phone, and flew to Portugal. No conferences, no email. Just long walks, warm pastries, and the sound of ocean waves crashing against ancient cliffs. For the first time in my adult life, I felt weightless. No expectations, no judgment, no pretending, just me. 6 weeks passed in Lisbon like a dream I never wanted to wake from. I walked cobblestone streets at sunrise, sipped espresso by the waterfront, and let the past dissolve with each crashing wave. No meetings, no deadlines, no need to prove anything. Just breath, just stillness. One morning, as I stood on a rooftop watching the sun rise over the red-tiled city, a thought came to me. Not heavy or sharp, but quiet and calm. I don't owe anyone my silence ever again. When I returned to Seattle, I didn't go back to the same apartment. I'd sold it while I was away. Instead, I moved into a new place. Light-filled, modern, uncluttered. I painted the walls myself. I planted lavender on the balcony. I filled the bookshelf only with things that made me feel proud. My first product manual, Elena's handwritten pitch from year one, a photo of my team standing beneath our company logo. Not a single family photo made it through the door. My parents tried contacting me once after that. A letter arrived, handwritten, thick with guilt. They said they missed me, that Julian was struggling, that they hoped someday I'd understand. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer I never opened again, and didn't respond. Because I finally understood something they never did. Love without respect isn't love at all. At work, I resumed my role with a calmer heart. Elena noticed it right away. "You're lighter," she said one day during a break. "I stopped carrying things that weren't mine," I answered. We laughed, but she nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. In the months that followed, I launched a mentorship program for young women in tech, especially those who came from immigrant or underrepresented backgrounds. I wanted to be the voice I never had, the hand I once wished had reached out for mine. And the more I gave to that purpose, the more whole I became. One evening, as I stood on stage delivering a keynote at a national conference, I looked out at the packed auditorium, saw hundreds of young faces looking back at me with fire and hunger in their eyes. I began my speech not with metrics or graphs, but with this. I used to believe I had to earn love by achieving. That if I built enough, gave enough, succeeded enough, someone would finally look at me and say, "You are enough." But I don't believe that anymore. Now I believe you have to see yourself first. Claim your worth before anyone else can validate it or steal it. Applause followed. But even if no one had clapped, it wouldn't have mattered. Because I wasn't speaking for them. I was speaking for the girl who stayed up all night in a cold library learning how to build something out of nothing. For the woman who finally walked away from the noise. For me. And that was more than enough.